I'm using a throwaway account for obvious reasons. I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I don't even know where to start. So, here it goes. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a magical night. My wife, Clara, and I had been married for 5 years, and things were fine. Or so I thought. Like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but nothing too serious. I thought we were in a good place, happy even. That night, as the clock neared midnight, Clara handed me a small envelope. I remember her face. She looked nervous but excited, like she couldn't wait to share something life-changing. My heart raced. I opened it and found a folded piece of paper and a pregnancy test inside. The test had 2 pink lines. Positive. I looked at her in disbelief, my eyes welling up with tears. "You're pregnant?" I asked, barely able to contain my excitement. She nodded, tears streaming down her face too. We hugged, and I couldn't stop smiling. It was the best New Year's Eve I'd ever had. We toasted with sparkling cider instead of champagne, and I started dreaming out loud about our future. "I'm going to be a dad," I kept repeating, almost like I couldn't believe it. Clara seemed genuinely happy. She said she had taken the test earlier that day but waited until midnight to tell me, to make it special. It was perfect, too perfect, in hindsight. Little did I know that this moment of joy was about to unravel into the darkest chapter of my life. But I wouldn't find out the truth until a week later, after a routine doctor's appointment revealed something I never saw coming. The first week of January started off great. I couldn't stop smiling, thinking about the baby. I even started making a list of names and researching baby books. Clara seemed happy too, though I noticed she was more distant than usual. I chalked it up to the pregnancy hormones or maybe nerves about becoming parents. That Friday, I had a routine checkup at my doctor's office. Nothing special, just an annual physical. I'd been doing these for years and didn't think much of it. The doctor asked the usual questions, took some blood, and said he'd follow up if there was anything concerning. At the end of the appointment, I casually mentioned the pregnancy to him. "My wife and I just found out we're expecting," I said, grinning. He congratulated me, but then his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said, flipping through my chart. "Weren't you tested a few years ago for fertility issues?" I froze. "Yeah," I replied slowly. "But it wasn't a big deal, right? You said everything was fine back then." He hesitated, his face suddenly serious. "Actually, no. When we ran those tests, they showed that you're infertile." "I thought we discussed this." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, infertile? Like, completely?" He nodded. "I'm sorry. Based on those results, it's highly unlikely that you could father a child." I felt like the room was spinning. My ears were ringing, and I could barely process what he was saying. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," he said gently. "If you'd like, we can run the tests again to confirm, but the results from before were conclusive." I sat there in silence, my mind racing. If I was infertile, then how? How was Clara pregnant? I left the doctor's office in a daze, my heart pounding. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't face her, not yet. Instead, I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. The pieces started falling into place, and a dark, sinking feeling settled in my gut. Had Clara cheated on me? I spent the entire drive home rehearsing what I was going to say. My emotions swung wildly: anger, confusion, heartbreak. But by the time I parked in our driveway, I felt eerily calm. The truth needed to come out, no matter how much it hurt. Clara was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her laptop. She smiled when she saw me, but her expression shifted when she noticed my face. "Everything okay?" she asked, closing the laptop. I stood there for a moment, staring at her. This woman I'd loved, trusted, and planned my future with. Finally I said, "I went to the doctor today." Her smile faltered. "Oh? Everything good?" "They reminded me about something. Something I'd forgotten, or maybe didn't fully understand back then." I paused, watching her closely. "They told me I'm infertile." Clara froze. For a split second, her expression was unreadable. Then she forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. That's ridiculous. You're not infertile, you're about to be a dad. I shook my head. No, Clara. I can't have kids. The tests were conclusive. They offered to run them again to confirm, but I already know. Her face paled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. That's when I realized she wasn't going to deny it. Not really. Who's the father? I asked, my voice low but firm. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away. I don't know, she whispered. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You don't know? I repeated, incredulous. How many options are there, Clara? How long has this been going on? She broke down sobbing, but her tears didn't move me. I stood there, cold and numb, as she confessed. She'd been seeing someone else for months, a coworker. But then there was another man, someone she'd met through a mutual friend. She couldn't be sure who the father was. I never meant for this to happen, she cried. I love you. I was going to end it, I swear, but then I found out I was pregnant, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I'd planned to spend the rest of my life with, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now, she was carrying another man's child. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I just stood there, staring at her as my world crumbled around me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The love I felt for her was replaced by something darker, something cold and calculating. You're right, I said finally, my voice calm and steady. You didn't mean for this to happen. But it did. And now you're going to deal with the consequences. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to cry alone. I needed time to think. Because one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Clara's muffled sobs echoed from the bedroom down the hall, but I felt no sympathy. I couldn't bring myself to sleep next to her, not after what I'd learned. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her with someone else. My mind raced, fueled by anger and betrayal. By morning, I'd made up my mind. This wasn't going to end with me being the fool. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly while she played the victim. No. She was going to regret every choice that led her here. The first step was simple. I had to gather proof. Her confession was enough for me, but I needed more, something undeniable. If this turned into a divorce battle, I didn't want her twisting the narrative or pretending this was just a misunderstanding. I started with her phone. Clara was still asleep, so I crept into our bedroom and took it off the nightstand. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, but what I found made my stomach churn. There were texts. Dozens of them. Some from her coworker, Jason. Others from another man named Ryan. They were flirty, suggestive, and full of little clues about the times they'd met up. My heart pounded as I took screenshots and forwarded everything to myself. And then I hit the jackpot. Photos. Private ones. Some of her, some of them together. My chest tightened as I saved those two. I didn't want to see them, but I needed the evidence. This wasn't just infidelity, this was a deliberate, ongoing betrayal. By the time Clara woke up, I had everything I needed. She came into the kitchen looking wrecked, puffy eyes, pale face. Can we talk? She asked softly. I didn't look up from my coffee. Not yet, I said. I need time to process. She nodded, biting her lip, and shuffled off to the bathroom. I could tell she wanted to fix things, but I wasn't interested in her apologies or excuses. My mind was already on the next phase of my plan. The baby? That was the key. She'd pinned all her hopes on me stepping up and raising someone else's child, believing I'd forgive her for the sake of a family. But now that I knew the truth, I wasn't going to play that role. Instead, I was going to make her suffer for what she'd done. I spent the next few days pretending to process everything while quietly setting my plan into motion. Clara thought I was coming around. She kept tiptoeing around me, offering to talk, cooking my favorite meals, and even suggesting we see a counselor. I nodded along, giving her just enough hope to keep her off guard. But behind the scenes, I was unraveling her lies piece by piece. First, I hired a private investigator. I wanted to make sure I hadn't missed anything and to dig deeper into her relationships with Jason and Ryan. The investigator was discreet, and within days, he confirmed everything I'd already suspected, and more. Clara had been seeing Jason for nearly a year. Ryan was a more recent fling, but their messages suggested the baby was likely his. Apparently, she told both men conflicting stories about our marriage and her plans for the future. The PI even found out that Clara had been using money from our joint account to pay for fancy hotel stays and gifts for both men. That one hit hard. Not only had she betrayed me emotionally, but she'd also been stealing from me to fund her affairs. Next, I met with a lawyer. I explained the situation and shared the evidence I'd gathered. He assured me that with the proof I had, I'd be in a strong position if I filed for divorce. He also recommended we move quickly before Clara could try to manipulate the narrative. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. Divorce wasn't enough, not for what she'd done. I wanted her to feel the same pain and humiliation she'd caused me. The final piece of my plan was the most delicate, confronting Jason and Ryan. I wanted them to know exactly what kind of person Clara was, but I also wanted to use them to my advantage. So, I started with Jason. I arranged to meet him at a coffee shop, pretending to be a potential client from his workplace. When he arrived, he looked confused but polite. "Are you Mr. Bennett?" he asked, holding out his hand. I shook it and motioned for him to sit. "No," I said calmly. "I'm Clara's husband." His face turned ghostly pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't bother lying. I know everything." For the next 20 minutes, I laid out all the evidence I had against him and Clara. He stammered, apologized, and tried to explain, but I didn't care. By the time I was done, he was practically begging me not to go to his boss or his wife. "You'll stay out of our lives," I said, my voice icy. "And if I hear so much as a whisper about you contacting Clara again, I'll make sure your wife and your employer get all these photos and messages." He nodded frantically, swearing he'd never speak to her again. Next, I turned my attention to Ryan. His reaction was similar: shock, denial, and finally fear. By the time I was done with him, he was groveling, promising to stay away from Clara and take responsibility for the baby if it was his. It was satisfying, but not enough. The real confrontation, the one that mattered most, was still to come. The house was eerily quiet when I got home after my meetings with Jason and Ryan. Clara was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and gave me a weak smile. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" I set my bag down and looked at her, my expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Her smile vanished, and she sat up straighter, clearly nervous. "Okay," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "What about?" I took a deep breath, feigning composure. "I know about Jason. And Ryan." Her face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand to silence her. "Don't bother denying it. I've seen the messages. The photos. I know everything." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she started to sob. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "I was stupid, and I made a mistake, but I love you. I want to fix this." "Fix this?" I interrupted, my voice cold. "Clara, you didn't just make a mistake. You made dozens of deliberate choices to betray me. And now, you're carrying another man's child." She buried her face in her hands, crying uncontrollably. For a moment I just watched her, letting her stew in the consequences of her actions. Finally I spoke again. "Here's what's going to happen. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We're getting divorced." Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. "No! Please, we can work through this." I'll do anything, I swear. It's too late for that, I said firmly. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to cheat. And the best part? I have all the evidence. Messages, photos, receipts, it's all there. You can fight me in court if you want, but you'll lose. She looked utterly broken, but I wasn't finished. Oh, and one more thing, I added. I spoke to Jason and Ryan. They know everything too. Jason won't be contacting you again. He's more worried about keeping his wife from finding out. And Ryan? He's ready to step up as the father of your child. So, congratulations. You can go play happy family with him. Her sobs turned to wails as she realized the full weight of what I'd done. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little. This was the bed she'd made, and now she had to lie in it. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door. I'll be staying somewhere else until the divorce is finalized, I said without looking back. Good luck, Clara. You're going to need it. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was in control. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still one final twist that Clara, and everyone else, would never see coming. A week after I walked out, things started falling into place. Clara had been served divorce papers, and my lawyer assured me that with the mountain of evidence I'd provided, things would go in my favor. I was staying at a friend's place, rebuilding my life piece by piece. But then, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. One morning I got a call from Ryan. I almost didn't pick up. I'd already washed my hands of him and Jason. But curiosity got the better of me. Hey, he said, his voice shaky. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. I stayed silent, letting him continue. It's about the baby, he said. I just found out. Clara lied to me too. She said she was certain the baby was mine, but I pushed her to get a paternity test. The results came back yesterday, and I'm not the father. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart racing. What did you just say? I asked slowly. She said the baby was mine, but it's not. Ryan repeated. I don't know what game she's playing, but I thought you should know. I hung up without saying another word, my mind spinning. If Ryan wasn't the father, and I wasn't the father, then who was? I reached out to the private investigator again, asking him to dig deeper into Clara's life. It didn't take him long to uncover another secret. Clara had been involved with yet another man, a third one. This one wasn't a coworker or a casual fling. He was someone from her past, someone she'd reconnected with online. The PI even found his name, Ethan. He lived in another city, and from what I could tell, he had no idea Clara was pregnant. My blood boiled. How many lies had she told? How many lives had she tangled up in her web? I debated whether to confront her or let it play out. But then I realized I didn't need to do anything. The truth would eventually destroy her. I just had to wait. And I didn't have to wait long. The revelation about Ethan was like a match dropped onto a pile of dry tinder. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Clara's lies were about to implode her life all on their own. The first domino fell when Ryan, furious after learning the baby wasn't his, decided he wasn't going to stay quiet. He reached out to Jason, and the two of them compared notes. Jason, still desperate to keep his own wife in the dark, was livid that Clara had dragged him into this mess. Together, they decided to confront her. The next thing I knew, I got a call from Clara. It was late at night, and her voice was frantic. What did you do? She screamed. Excuse me? I said, feigning innocence. Jason and Ryan showed up at the house. She cried. They're accusing me of lying, of playing games. They're threatening to tell everyone at work, and Jason says he's going to tell my boss. I couldn't help but smirk. Maybe you should have thought about that before you lied to them. Or to me. Her sobs on the other end of the line were almost pitiful. Almost. You don't understand. They're ruining everything. No, Clara, I said coldly. You ruined everything." I hung up before she could respond. I didn't care what happened to her anymore. But the chaos wasn't over yet. A few days later, the private investigator called me with another update. Ethan, the third man, had found out about the baby. Apparently, Clara had contacted him after Ryan and Jason confronted her, desperate to find someone to cling to. She must have thought Ethan would be her saving grace. But it didn't go the way she'd hoped. Ethan, the PI told me, was married. When Clara dropped the news about the baby, he panicked. His wife found out almost immediately, and the fallout was brutal. Ethan cut off all contact with Clara, leaving her completely alone. The walls were closing in. Clara's coworkers started whispering about her after Jason's confrontation. Her boss called her in for a meeting to discuss the unprofessional conduct that had come to light. And the cherry on top? Word of her pregnancy, and the tangled web of lies surrounding it, had spread to her family. I heard from a mutual friend that Clara's parents, who'd always been supportive of her, were furious. They'd believed she was happily married and had been overjoyed about the baby. Now they were ashamed, and Clara was desperate to win back their favor. But it was too late. Her lies had caught up to her, and the life she'd so carefully built was falling apart. I could have walked away then, content with the destruction she'd brought upon herself. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final move I needed to make, one that would ensure Clara would never forget the consequences of her betrayal. Clara had hit rock bottom. Her relationships were in shambles, her job was hanging by a thread, and even her own family had turned against her. But I wasn't satisfied. I needed to make sure she truly understood the gravity of what she'd done, not just to me, but to everyone she had deceived. The final piece of my plan came together when I remembered something important: our house. Technically, it was mine. I had purchased it before we got married, and it was solely in my name. Clara had contributed nothing financially, which meant she had no legal claim to it. The lawyer confirmed this when I double-checked. I waited until the day Clara was out, likely trying to salvage what was left of her social life. Then I changed the locks. I also arranged for a moving company to box up her belongings and deliver them to her parents' house. The message was clear: she no longer had a place in my life, or my home. When she returned that evening, she found the locks changed and a note taped to the door. It was short and to the point. "Clara, you have no right to be here anymore. Your things are with your parents. Do not contact me unless it's through my lawyer. This is the life you chose. Live with it. James." I wish I could have seen her face as she read it, but I was watching from a distance, parked a block away. She stood on the porch for a while, pacing and making frantic calls. My phone buzzed, but I didn't pick up. Her texts came next, dozens of them. Pleas for forgiveness, threats to take me to court, promises to change. I ignored them all. The next morning, I filed a restraining order. My lawyer had already prepared the paperwork, citing her volatile behavior and the confrontation she'd brought to my doorstep with Jason and Ryan. It was granted within days, further cementing the fact that Clara and I were done. But the real nail in the coffin came when I sent a package to her workplace. Inside were copies of the evidence I'd collected, photos, text messages, even receipts. I included a short note. "You can't run from the truth forever." From what I heard later, her boss didn't take kindly to the scandal. Clara was let go within a week. At this point, there was nothing left for her to cling to. The life she tried to build on lies and deceit was gone. And me? I felt free for the first time in months. Clara had wanted to trap me in a future that wasn't mine, but instead, she'd destroyed herself. Or so I thought. There was one last twist in this story, one I never saw coming. After the dust settled, I thought the nightmare was finally over. Clara was out of my life, the divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, and I was beginning to focus on rebuilding myself. But just when I thought I could finally breathe, the final twist arrived in the form of a letter. It was a plain white envelope, slipped under the door of the place I was staying. There was no return address. Curious and cautious, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. James, you think you've won. But there's something you don't know. The truth always has a way of coming out. Clara. I stared at the letter, a chill running down my spine. What could she possibly mean? I thought I had uncovered every lie, exposed every betrayal. What more could she be hiding? Unable to shake the unease, I reached out to the private investigator one last time, asking him to dig deeper. A week later, he called me with news that made my blood run cold. Clara wasn't just entangled with Jason, Ryan, and Ethan. She had been involved in a series of manipulative schemes dating back years before we even met. It turned out I wasn't her first victim. The investigator found evidence of a pattern. Clara would embed herself in someone's life, gain their trust, and then exploit them emotionally and financially. But the most shocking discovery? The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Clara had been trying to secure a future for herself, knowing that her web of lies was beginning to unravel. The baby wasn't about love or family, it was her backup plan. The investigator also uncovered documents suggesting that Clara had been preparing to flee. She had opened a bank account under a different name and had been quietly transferring money to it. She hadn't planned to stick around once the truth came out. Her goal was to leave me, and everyone else, in the wreckage while she disappeared with a clean slate. Suddenly, her cryptic letter made sense. She had meant to vanish, but my actions had forced her hand. By exposing her so thoroughly, I had destroyed her escape plan. She was trapped, and now, she wanted revenge. But here's the thing, I wasn't afraid anymore. If Clara thought she could intimidate me, she was wrong. I forwarded the investigator's findings to my lawyer, ensuring that Clara's manipulations would be documented in court. I also took extra precautions, securing my finances and informing the authorities of her attempts to create a false identity. The last time I heard from Clara, it was through a desperate email. She claimed she had changed and begged me for a second chance. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. As for me, I walked away from the ashes of that marriage stronger than ever. I learned that love without trust isn't love at all, and that betrayal has a way of revealing the true nature of the people around you. To anyone reading this, let my story serve as a warning: trust is earned, not given. And when someone shows you their true colors, believe them the first time. Thank you for listening, Reddit. This chapter of my life is finally closed. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.